Hey guys, White Fox 1225 here, and today we're going to be discussing the lore of vampires in the Elder Scrolls. We'll be going over everything from their origins with Molag Bal, how the disease is contracted and cured, the different types of vampires we see in Tamriel, and other cool tidbits of lore. So let's get started. To talk about the origins of vampirism, we need to go back to a time before any of the Elder Scrolls games take place. Molag Bal, the Daedric Prince of Domination, was motivated by his hatred of Arkay to create the first vampire. Arkay is the divine god of birth, death, and the cycle of life, so Molag Bal, the Prince of Domination, could think of no better way to thwart Arkay than to create a disease that turned men and mer into the undead and gave them seemingly infinite life. To do this, Molag Bal abducted a Nedic Arkay priestess named Lamai Balefag, or better known as Lamai Bal. He brutally raped her and left her for dead in the forest of Skyrim. What happens after that depends on which version of history you want to believe. In the lore books, she was rescued by nomads but later passed away. As these nomads went to cremate her, she came back alive and brutally murdered all of them, killing the women and children and raping the men in the same manner Molag Bal had raped her. However, Lamai Bal tells a different story. You get a chance to speak to her in ESO, and she shows you a vision of what happened. You see that after she was raped, she was indeed found by nomads, but she says they did not try to help her, but instead they saw that she had been infected with Molag Bal's evil and tried to burn her alive. She resisted and killed them all, but when she realized what she did, she begged Arkay for forgiveness, but Arkay would not speak with her anymore, so she denounced both Arkay and Molag Bal. Lamai Bal was now the first vampire, and she would go on to create many more of her kind, becoming the mother and origin of vampires on Tamriel. I do tend to believe the second version of events just because we actually saw them in game, but I want to tell you guys both versions of the story so you can make your own decision. Let's move on and talk about how vampirism works and some of the lore surrounding the infection, acquisition, and curing of the disease. So there are different strands of vampirism. Depending on the game, the disease is known as porphyric hemophilia, sanguinar vampiris, and noxophilic sanguivaria. One is most commonly infected by a bite or a scratch from a vampire, but in the game lore books, it also mentions other ways to contract the disease, such as magical items, the curse of a powerful mage, or even from Molag Bal himself. After contracting the disease, you will show no symptoms for the first 2 to 4 days, other than disturbing nightmares. During this short time period, vampires can be cured by a divine priest or a cure disease potion, but after the first 4 days, things become a little bit more complicated. The victim who has contracted the infection will die sometime around the 5th day. In the book Vampires of Iliac Bay, a man talks about how he died 5 days after a run-in with a vampire, only to find himself waking up in a morgue 2 weeks later as a vampire himself. So it would seem like becoming a vampire does actually involve physically dying and coming back to life, which of course complicates curing yourself of the affliction. Vampirism can be cured though. There isn't really one known cure, but instead a bunch of methods that we've seen work in the past. Molag Bal himself has the power to cure a person of vampirism. Galura Rathari wrote in a journal that he cured the disease by undertaking and completing a quest for Molag Bal, who in return cleansed him of the disease. In Daggerfall, it is said that some forms of vampirism can be cured by killing the Blood Father or Blood Mother who spawned the disease, and once they're killed, anyone infected with that bloodline will return to normal. In Oblivion, bathing in purge blood salts is said to work. In Skyrim, the player can be cured by a mage named Phalion, who uses a filled black soul gem to call upon the forces of Oblivion to return mortal life to the Dragonborn. And last, and maybe a less ideal way to cure vampirism, is to contract lycanthropy, which will take the place of the vampirism. So as you can see, there isn't necessarily a go-to fix for curing the disease, but we've seen different methods work in the past. Vampires in the Elder Scrolls follow most of the common traits that we see in fantasy. Becoming a vampire makes you faster, tougher, and more agile. You become immune to all other diseases. And maybe the biggest incentive is that vampires have seemingly infinite life. There are of course some downsides as well. Vampires are extremely vulnerable to the sun. Exposure for more than a few seconds can burn them. Also, they must feed on the blood of a warm-blooded creature at least once a night, or else they will experience intense hunger and madness. The important thing to note with that is that a warm-blooded creature does not have to be a human. There are many books and journals that show that some vampires choose to feed on wild animals to quench their thirst. When a vampire feeds, two things happen. It helps conceal their true form so they can't be recognized as a vampire, but it also suppresses some of their powers, so in a sense the more they feed the weaker they become, which is something that you might not expect. I always thought it would be the other way around. One last thing I want to mention is that despite what you might think, vampires are fertile, and there is records of vampires impregnating mortals, although it's not clear if a female vampire could carry a child. So those are some universal traits of typical vampires in the Elder Scrolls, but there's a very special type of vampire we haven't talked about yet. These are the Vampire Lords, or pure-blooded vampires that first showed up in the Dawnguard expansion for Skyrim. They are definitely the most unique and powerful, with the ability to transform into a deadly beast-like form. You can see some pictures of that on the screen. Some prominent abilities Vampire Lords have are raising the dead, summoning gargoyles, absorbing health, turning into mist, night vision, being able to essentially use telekinesis to control their enemies, and on top of that, just being super strong. So in order to be a pure-blooded vampire, you must be given vampirism by Molag Bal himself, or by another original vampire lord. This strain works a little differently, where as it's passed on it becomes weaker and weaker until the recipient can't even turn into the vampire lord form. This is part of why pure-blooded vampires are so rare. The Vampire Lords in Skyrim were part of the Volkihar vampire clan, a clan that started in the first era when Lord Harkin, a king of the era, made a deal with Molag Bal. He received the gift of pure-blooded vampirism, but in return sacrificed 1,000 of his innocent subjects, and his daughter Sarana and his wife Valerica were raped by Molag Bal. I would say that pure-blooded vampirism is the most interesting and unique bloodline, but there's countless other unique bloodlines and clans with distinct abilities and habits. Typically, but not always, vampires live in groups or clans that share the same bloodline because it gives them a strength in numbers advantage. A few examples of clans mentioned in the lore are the Wet Fang Sodality of Blackmarsh, who use magicka to keep their captives in a coma state and drain them of blood slowly. There's also the Dread Talboth, who prey on children, taking their place in the family and waiting patiently for years before murdering them all. Those are some of the more unique examples I could find, but there's plenty more, and maybe I'll make a separate video going over known vampire clans if there's any interest. But that's about it for the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you leave it a like. I'm going to do lots more lore videos and ESO story recaps on this channel, so if you want to see that, make sure you hit the subscribe button. I did a similar video to this one, going over the different forms of lycanthropy in the Elder Scrolls. So there will be a link in the comments to that. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.